The morning tide brought a most unexpected arrival. At dawn, the fishing town of Greycliff came awake to the sound of surf and distant seagulls. The beach, usually barren except for bits of driftwood and seaweed, was no stranger to the occasional abandoned dinghy or lost shipping crate. But on this particular day, a small boat appeared, drifting against the gentle pull of the tide like a reluctant visitor. Its hull was worn and riddled with scrapes, a battered vessel that had clearly weathered more trials than a casual fisherman's journey. No one was on board, no footprints in the sand, no sailors or desperate castaways. Yet the boat's presence carried a disquieting weight. Fishermen were the first to approach. They noted how deeply the boat's hull sat in the water, despite no visible cargo. Intrigued, a handful of them finally managed to yank it onto solid ground, their boots digging into the wet sand. As soon as the sturdy rope lines were secured, the locals clambered aboard, expecting to find a rusted tackle box or waterlogged personal effects. Instead, they discovered something far more haunting: neatly stacked diaries in the boat's bow, each bound in cracked leather. There must have been a dozen of them in total, perhaps more. It fell to the local authorities to examine the diaries. Sheriff Maud Hinson, a middle-aged woman with a sharp gaze and a steady composure, arrived at the beach later that morning. By that time, most of the townspeople had gathered in a loose circle around the curious vessel. With solemn purpose, she placed the diaries in large plastic bags and ushered them to her office, determined to secure them until she could fully investigate whatever they contained. Rumors spread among the residents as they lingered on the shore. They whispered of ghost ships and malevolent curses, creating an air of dread that clung to every hushed conversation. Jacob Reeves, a quiet man who worked as an archivist in the town's modest historical society, heard these rumors and felt an inexplicable pull. Something about diaries and confessions kindled both his professional curiosity and a sense of apprehension. While Greycliff was no stranger to shipwrecks or maritime mysteries, confessional diaries were out of the ordinary. He politely presented himself at the sheriff's office the next day, volunteering his expertise in deciphering and preserving old texts. Sheriff Henson, after some hesitation, agreed it might be helpful to have someone adept at careful reading and archiving, especially because the diaries, upon her cursory glance, seemed to be written in differing styles of handwriting and varying degrees of dryness in their ink. The diaries were spread across a large wooden table in the sheriff's office, each carefully labeled with an evidence tag. Most were water-stained, the pages battered. A few had scribbled writing that looked as if it were done in a frenzy, pin lines crossing over one another. Jacob's heart pounded the moment he flipped open the first diary, noticing columns of confessions that made the hairs on his arms stand up. The first entry he examined started ordinarily enough. Someone describing a voyage with a small group of close acquaintances, presumably on a research expedition to chart marine habitats. The second page, however, took a chilling turn. It detailed the writer's first confession, a sense of dread upon leaving port, a paranoia that someone among the group wished them harm. This nameless author wrote how a friend teased him about seeing shadows moving across the deck late at night, how he felt compelled to keep this diary as a way to maintain his sanity. The lines were occasionally jagged and slanted, hinting at a trembling hand. Jacob realized that there was no name signed at the end of the entries, only a scrawled initial D. He searched for a date but found none, only references to days at sea, like day 2, day 3, and so forth. The final pages of this diary were water-damaged, yet some words remained legible. "No one can be trusted, they whisper behind my back. The daily rations are tampered with. Tonight I will stay awake." Jacob had read in silence, feeling the unsettling tingle of a secret half-buried. The diary seemed to speak of a hidden malevolence aboard that boat. A second journal, with corner edges tattered and soaked in salt water, belonged to someone who practiced far more meticulous handwriting. Page after page featured tight columns of text, each dated meticulously. Unlike the first diary, this one had a name on the inside front cover: Martin Caldwell. The first entry described Martin's excitement at leading a group expedition into waters seldom navigated, referencing a quest for a unique marine species. Yet as Jacob flicked through the following entries, he noticed a shift in tone. Martin expressed deep frustration with the group's dwindling supplies and chronic seasickness among the crew. His words carried resentment for a colleague he referred to only as the meddler, lambasting the meddler's theories about an impending ill omen. By the midpoint of Martin's diary, his narrative spiraled into anger-fueled diatribes about sabotage, though no culprit was named, and, most chillingly, Martin admitted to correcting the problem one night. Jacob felt his stomach knot. Correcting the problem, in the context Martin used, seemed to suggest he had confronted the meddler in a particularly drastic way, though the passage left too much unsaid. Sheriff Hinson, reading over his shoulder, placed a hand on Jacob's arm, silently conveying that this was indeed disturbing. Martin's final entries described a growing storm, a swirling sea that put them all on edge. Then there was one last scrawled note. He was right. There is something out there. Over the next several days, Jacob pored over each diary, withdrawing only to gulp down coffee or catch a few hours of restless sleep. The diaries shared a grim tapestry of events, each from a different perspective. One writer, whose cramped scribbling never revealed a name, expressed an almost gleeful anticipation of chaos, confessing to petty sabotage like drilling small holes in the hull or switching labels on the emergency supplies. This same individual eventually wrote of regret, describing a horrifying realization that their sabotage might actually doom them all. But the diaries offered no clear sequence of events. No single vantage point that explained exactly what happened on board. Instead, each confession hinted at deeper mistrust, betrayals, and illusions. As Jacob read on, he grew convinced that more than a series of petty feuds was at play. Certain references hinted at a broader cause or a singular catastrophic event. One diary contained sketches of a bizarre symbol, a circle with jagged lines protruding from it in all directions. Written beneath it were the words, "It calls from below." Another diary described a recurring dream shared among the crew, featuring black, sinewy arms reaching up from the ocean's depths to pull them down. Each writer believed the dream to be their private torment, yet all recounted hearing screams at night, as if nightmares had spilled over into reality. The tension in Graycliff rose with each detail that Jacob shared with the sheriff. Word spread that the diary spoke of foul play, of possible murder or madness, leading to sensational gossip. The fishermen who first discovered the boat were quietly questioned. They claimed not to have tampered with anything aside from moving the diaries to the shore. Still, no one could explain why the boat was devoid of corpses, given the confession's dire descriptions of violence. Desperate to find answers, Sheriff Hinson placed a request with the Coast Guard to investigate missing vessels reported in the region over the last few weeks. In the midst of these unfolding details, Jacob started to have troubling dreams. He would see himself standing on a deck at night, watching the ocean churn beneath a moonless sky. Terrible shapes would writhe in the water, clawing at the hull. He'd wake up to thunderous heartbeats echoing in his chest, unsure whether the diaries were creeping into his own psyche. Sometimes, vague recollections made him wonder if he'd heard voices in the quiet corners of his home. Indistinguishable whispers telling him to return to the diaries, to read them cover to cover until the full story revealed itself. Eventually, the Coast Guard responded. According to their records, a research vessel named the Arcadia had set sail from a port 300 miles south of Graycliff, carrying a team of both scientists and a freelance journalist. Its manifest listed 8 passengers total. Official logs indicated the ship never reached its intended destination. The mission was presumably aborted or lost. No rescue calls were received. Now Jacob had a potential lead. The diaries likely belonged to the Arcadia's passengers. It seemed that the small boat found in Graycliff was a lifeboat from that ill-fated vessel. Bolstered by this new insight, Jacob redoubled his efforts comparing the diary's confessions to the known passenger list. Some of the diaries had faint initials scrawled at the bottom of random pages, matching 2 or 3 names from the passenger list. In Martin Caldwell's case, the name was explicit, so that confirmed his presence. Another passenger named Danielle Parker signed her entries with a neat DP in red ink, and those pages contained wrenching admissions of guilt over an unspecified accident she had caused. As Jacob read Danielle's confessions, a pattern emerged. She believed she had inadvertently contributed to a situation that made them all more vulnerable at sea, perhaps leaving a hatch open before a storm, or incorrectly reading navigational charts. By the time Jacob moved on to the final diary, he was exhausted. He lit the small desk lamp in the dimly lit storeroom adjacent to the sheriff's office and opened the diary's cover. Swallowing a wave of nerves, he deciphered a careful signature on the first page. Naoko Nishimura. Naoko's entries were meticulously ordered pages, lined with precise dates and location references. She was evidently the group's designated navigator, documenting wind speeds and oceanic currents. Her early entries mentioned how professional rivalries had plagued the start of the expedition. She described Martin Caldwell as demanding, controlling, but brilliant, and Danielle Parker as someone eager to prove herself, but haunted by self-doubt. Another passenger, the journalist, was referred to as Lynn, who allegedly gloried in capturing tension among the team to create a good story. Then, the diary pivoted. Naoko's text thrummed with urgency. She recounted an emergency, a fuel line leak discovered 5 days into the voyage which forced them off course. Then came the big storm she had feared, the sea swelling high enough to black out the horizon. But the subtle horror threaded into her narrative revolved around the crew's behavior. She noted how Martin seemed to vanish from the common areas for hours, returning with a distant, almost fanical expression. How Danielle cried at night, mumbling about sabotage and the unrelenting fear that someone wanted them all dead. And how Len grew jumpy, scribbling constant notes in a little black pad, refusing to let anyone read them. Naoko wrote of a collective paranoia that took hold after the first major storm. Food rations disappeared. Accusations flew. The diaries matched up at last, describing the same chilling scenario from multiple perspectives. Someone was destroying their lifeboats, or at least tampering with them. On day 8, they found heavy gashes along the lifeboat's undersides, as if battered by something or someone. Naoko's diary included a shocking confession of her own. On day 9, while searching for more sabotage, she confronted the meddler believed to be behind it all. She withheld the name, calling them only the saboteur. She stated plainly that the person attacked her with a storm lantern. She fought back, wrestled it away, and in the ensuing chaos the lantern crashed onto the deck, igniting a small blaze. The saboteur fled, leaving Naoko to smother the flames. She never saw them again. As Jacob turned the pages, he found them partially stuck together by salt water, the ink smudged from repeated dampness. Still, a horrifying outline emerged. Naoko described a final confrontation that occurred deep in the night. People were screaming. Martin Caldwell brandished a weapon to subdue the saboteur. The saboteur was raving about a calling from the deep, a monstrous presence beneath the waves. In the aftermath, she recorded that one of the lifeboats had broken free, drifting into the raging sea with at least 4 people aboard. Willing or otherwise, the text was unclear. The last lines of Naoko's diary, written before the pen trailed off. They are gone. We are left with this final boat. We have no choice but to follow them. God help us. Jacob closed the diary, a cold sweat beading on his brow. He felt dizzy. Something in him resisted the final, horrifying conclusion that the diaries implied. The boat that arrived in Great Cliff was likely that final boat. Whoever had survived that confrontation must have launched it, or it had launched itself into the current, but no one was in it. No bodies, not a single sign of life save for these dozen confessions. What happened to them in those last moments at sea? Sheriff Hinson knocked gently, stepping into the storeroom with a grim expression. The Coast Guard found no sign of the Arcadia's wreckage. No one reported seeing any other lifeboat. It's as if they vanished. Her voice was low, contemplative. We have the confessions. Now, all that's left is deciding how far we go investigating what might just be an unspeakable tragedy. Jakob felt a surge of unease. These diaries, they suggest something more than a tragedy. There might be evidence of murders, possibly even something stranger. some references to nightmares or a presence that manipulated their minds. I know it sounds unbelievable, but every single account references a growing hysteria, a sense that they were lured. Sheriff Henson exhaled slowly. I hate to say this, but sometimes fear and isolation can break a group. The mind can conjure illusions out of storms and seas. She paused, as though weighing her words. I'm releasing your involvement, Jacob. You've done enough. It's time for this to go to a higher authority. In the days that followed, state investigators arrived to catalog the diaries as official evidence, interview the townspeople, and tow the boat to a secure facility. News vans appeared on Graycliff's main street, reporters clamoring for any juicy detail about the boat of horrors. The out-of-town presence transformed Graycliff into a spectacle. Local businesses profited from the sudden tourism, but an undercurrent of dread lingered. Gossip grew frenzied, with every rumor more outrageous than the last. Some said that sea creatures had devoured the boat's original occupants. Others painted dramatic legends about ghostly vanishings in the open ocean. Yet for Jacob, the diaries remained a living, pulsating horror in his mind, filling his dreams with swirling black waters and terrified faces. He tried returning to his everyday life, resuming his tasks at the Historical Society. But people kept cornering him in the grocery store, pressing him for details or sensational stories. At night, those same nightmares recurred. Sometimes he woke up certain that he heard footsteps in his hallway, as though someone from the Arcadia had come looking for their confessions. His sleep grew increasingly restless until, 3 weeks after the diaries were discovered, he received an unexpected midnight phone call. "Reeves?" The caller's voice was harsh, nearly drowned out by static. "The final diary belongs to you now, doesn't it?" Jacob bolted upright. "Who is this?" Instead of answering, the voice rasped. "You read them all. It's inside you now." Then the line clicked dead. Jacob's pulse thundered in his ears, and he spent the rest of the night on edge, checking every lock on his doors and windows. He wasn't sure if it was a prank. Still, something about the caller's final words, "It's inside you now," felt more chilling than any ghost story. He resolved to speak with the sheriff in the morning. Yet when the morning came, he walked down to the station only to find that Sheriff Hinson had been called away to an emergency in a neighboring town. Later that evening, Jacob found himself alone in the Historical Society building, after hours, rummaging through old maritime records. He had intended only to distract himself with catalogs of prior shipwrecks, but instead discovered references to old legends. Local fishermen from decades past claimed certain parts of the ocean were cursed, that dark tides lured unsuspecting vessels. Fantastical notions, he told himself, yet the details felt strangely resonant with the Arcadia's diaries. He read an account from 1956 describing an entire crew going mad after hearing strange underwater noises at night. That boat had returned with only a single survivor who refused to speak of what happened and died soon after. No body was ever recovered, just like the Arcadia's missing passengers. Jacob closed the files, taking a moment in the silence to steady his breathing. The building's old floors creaked as he moved, giving him a sense he wasn't alone. He tried to reassure himself perhaps it was just the wind, but when he glanced at the reading table, he spotted one of the diaries from the boat, Naoko's diary, lying among the older records. The investigators had supposedly collected all of them, so how had it ended up here? Heart hammering, he approached it slowly. As if compelled, he opened Naoko's diary. Pages he'd read before, yet they seemed to have changed. Words that once were blurry and water-stained now stood out more clearly. On a previously smeared page, he found a newly legible line. "The hour of the reckoning draws near. One must carry the knowledge forward, or be consumed." Jacob flipped faster, searching for an explanation. In the final entry, where the ink had abruptly cut off, there was a new sentence that chilled him. "They will come for the confessor next." His breath caught in his throat as the lights flickered overhead. For a split second, he was sure he heard the faint sound of waves lapping, as though the ocean had somehow flowed inside the building. He spun around, scanning the dark corners, the towering shelves of records. Nothing moved. and the building felt unnervingly quiet. He tried to calm himself. There was no rational reason for these words to have altered themselves. Perhaps he had missed them before. Perhaps the diaries were playing with his mind, an after effect of too much reading and too many sleepless nights. Jacob shut the diary. It felt heavier in his grasp than it had any right to be. He had an unsettling sensation of being followed. The overhead lights flickered once more, plunging the room into brief darkness, then sputtered back on. Anxiety gathered in the pit of his stomach. He needed to get out of there, away from whatever oppressive presence lingered among these pages. Why had the investigators taken all the diaries but left one behind? Or had someone, maybe even the unknown caller, deliberately placed it here? He stuffed the diary into his satchel and dashed out into the night. The streets were quiet, the late hour evident by the closed storefronts and dim windows. A salt-laced breeze drifted up from the shore, reminding him that the ocean was just a few blocks away. For a moment, he contemplated throwing the diary into the sea, giving it back to the black waters from which it had come. But some primal corner of his mind resisted that urge. What if throwing it into the ocean would only feed the darkness? His pace quickened until he reached his house, an older cottage tucked away at the edge of town. He locked his doors, made a double check of the windows, and placed the diary on his kitchen table. His adrenaline ebbed, replaced by exhaustion. Cool air drifted through a crack alongside the weathered frame of his back door. He tucked a towel under the door to block it, trying to feel safe. Yet distant thunder rolled outside, and the faint rumble of surf rang in the silence. Unable to rest, he unbuttoned his satchel again. He had to face the diary one more time, confident he wasn't losing his mind. At some level, he believed that reading the final passages again might break whatever hold they had on him. So he turned on a single table lamp, took a steadying breath, and stared down at Naoko's meticulously pinned words. The entries were the same as before, but now smaller side notes in the margins seemed newly visible, curved sentences written in a more frantic style. And Naoko's or someone else's? They read like warnings. Bird in the cage. Mustn't sing, or it awakens the sea. Daylight illusions hide the truth. She hears us through the waves. Jacob's mind reeled. The diaries had unlocked something in him, some painful awareness that perhaps the terror which plagued the Arcadia's passengers was not confined to the open ocean. His gaze shifted to the last page once more. The line was there, as before. They will come for the confessor next. Yet now, just below it, a fresh sentence bled through from the other sidewards, written in reversed script, as if scrawled from back to front. Give in. The sea claims all. Panic clutched Jacob's chest. He slammed the book shut and scrambled from his chair, nearly knocking it over. The gentle patter of rain commenced outside, drumming against the roof. He couldn't stay here, alone and tormented by these cryptic messages. But where would he go? Sheriff Hinson was out of town, and the rest of the town's law enforcement would either label him panicked or delusional. Still, the oppressive fear blooming inside him made sitting still an unbearable notion. He snatched his car keys, making a snap decision to drive out to the sheriff's temporary location in the neighboring county. As he reached the front door, a loud crashing sound came from his back porch, a splintering crack, like wood snapping under weight. His heart leaped into his throat. The overhead lights in the kitchen flickered, then died. No, he whispered, fumbling for the flashlight he kept near the front window. Another crash echoed, closer this time. It sounded as though an unseen force was trying to break into the house. He realized, with overwhelming dread, that the old back door was rotting on the hinges, an easy target for anything determined. He gripped the flashlight, flicking it on, but the beam wavered unsteadily. He forced himself to move, creeping along the hallway toward the back door. His pulse hammered in his ears. The rain pelted the windows with increasing fury. Then he froze. In the dim glow of the flashlight, he saw water pooling beneath the back door. It looked dark, brackish, more like ocean water than simple rain. It seeped under the threshold, trailing across the floor in thin ribbons, forming small puddles. The door creaked again, The handle jiggled. Jacob's flashlight flickered, and in those strobing flashes he had the fleeting impression of a hand, pale, slick, and with elongated fingers pulling at the door frame. A shape lurched at the edges of perception, features hidden in the gloom. Pure terror gripped him. He forgot all caution and bolted for the front door. He tore it open and dashed into the drizzle-shrouded street, heart pounding. He turned, catching one last glimpse of his cottage. In the faint porch light he saw water streaming from under the back door, as if an entire ocean was flooding inside. Lightning split the sky. For a moment he thought he heard the shriek of a voice calling his name. Then the house faded into darkness. Breath ragged, he stumbled down the street, steps splashing through shallow puddles. No one else was out at this late, storm-blown hour. He rushed to his car, nearly dropping the key. As soon as he got the engine running, he peeled away from the curb, leaving his cottage and whatever had invaded it behind. He could feel the diary's cold presence in his satchel, an unholy anchor. But he knew he had to keep them close. He had to show them to someone who would believe, or else destroy them completely. Lightning forked across the sky again, illuminating Graycliff's main road. Jacob accelerated, heading for the highway in hopes of reaching the sheriff. The wind howled and the rain battered his windshield, making the wipers nearly useless. Still, he pressed on, inhaling shallow, panicked breaths. Questions whirled in his mind. Was this haunting triggered by his reading of the diaries, or was it the diaries themselves, cursed or possessed? He recalled one confession that suggested the sea claims all. Perhaps the Arcadia's survivors, or their spirits roamed the waves, searching to reclaim what was lost. He had read enough stories to suspect that destruction of the diaries might lay the spirits to rest, but a deeper sense told him this evil was not contained solely in ink and paper. Something intangible and ancient had latched onto those fateful confessions, entwining all who read them into its web. By the time he passed the sign that read, "Leaving Graycliff," Jacob was no longer sure he could outrun this madness. Yet he drove on through the storm, a single glimmer of resolve pushing him forward. He might escape, or he might not. The diaries might claim him, just as they had claimed the Arcadia's crew, but he couldn't simply surrender. In the near blinding surge of rain, he whispered a vow. No matter what form the darkness took, he would carry these confessions to the authorities, ensuring that the horrors etched on those pages would not be lost at sea again. In doing so, perhaps he could finally break the tide of terror and grant peace to the restless souls who had drifted ashore, haunting Graycliff with their final fear-whacked words. Behind him, the ocean roared, waves cresting against the coastline. At the edges of his vision, he imagined phantom shapes rising from the deep, but he refused to look back. Ahead was his single thread of hope. With the diaries at his side, Jacob barreled forward into the dark unknown, determined to shine a light on confessions that were never meant to see the living world again.